Apparently, the only way into a closed system would always be at its highest point. Comma, let me say something about apparently again. For people just beginning to see some of these tapes. In times past, I spoke more dogmatically, verbally. And I'm sure that many people now have some concern that are first exposed to this, of me saying things about apparently, or me saying that I'm going to ask the rhetorical question, or me say, I suggest to you, that perhaps I am fishing around, or that I just had some sort of curious idea and decided to whip up upon you people. There is a reason I use the terms, in this case, apparently. I know exactly what I am talking about, more so than I can tell you in words from afar. But there is a reason. Anything you say in words, if I was speaking in a dogmatic, dyed-in-the-wool, bulletproof guru fashion, waving about some book, some external source, and saying, this is this, that is that, what you're doing is always, everyone, not just gurus, but everyone, you are chopping up reality. You're taking something alive anytime you say this is this. Anytime you say that A equals B, and therefore, and B equals C, and therefore A equals C, you have cut off reality. You've cut out a piece of it. And when you speak in what I'm calling right now dogmatic terms, in a real sense, not only have you cut up reality, but you, in this instance, the part you cut is now ready for the morgue. And what I am attempting to do, by using such terms as apparently, is to cut off something like a piece of a living blood vessel, but not render it fatally wounded, so that there are, at least in the binary sense, two ends of it that are still alive. And what it requires is that you grab hold of it. Of me saying apparently, or me saying, could I suggest to you, is to take this always dangerous cutting up of reality into words that seem, into sentences that seem to have a beginning and an end to it. But me saying apparently is to try and make you participate with it, while reminding you that I don't have to say that. I know exactly what I mean. Now, I could put it a different way. I could, at the very least, leave out apparently and just state it as a goddamn dyed-in-the-wool fact that I know and that most people don't. But then you're dealing with dead meat. You're dealing with a piece of reality that's been cut up, but has been rendered, in this case, inefficacious. It is no longer viable. You can take it, you can leave it, according to how you're wired up, according to what you hear. Me saying apparently is to try and clue you in, is to try and get people to participate, at least in the yellow circuit area, as you're listening. End of aside. Back to apparently. Let's double up. Apparently, the only way into an apparently closed system, now we're past the apparentlys and I'm telling you something, would be at its highest point. For life, that would be man. For man, that would be the yellow circuit. And here's how this comes out in everyday activities. All those who believe that you have made notes over the months and years of my attacks from the great world of verbiage, instead of the con, you need to draw a line down the column of the page and now try and plug in some of the prose. Any change is apparently dependent in man on the yellow circuit. That is, Let me ask you this. Have you ever, can you perceive of, any change being possible that was not first thought about in words? I've asked you that. I'll be decent enough to answer it. The answer is no. There is nothing, no possibility, no past occurrence in the life of man, just an ordinary person, that would apparently constitute any sort of change, anything that you have ever tried to do, whether you succeeded or failed, to think about it at this instant. The changes that have seemed to apparently have been haunting you for years. No change has ever been contemplated, no change has ever been felt necessary, no change has ever been attempted that was not first thought about in words. Can you take that? Can you try and create it your own little stratogram and see that life has its own variation of this, and it would be man? That when life attempts to change in ways that are not necessarily visible to binary sight, but when it attempts to change, what does it do? Just as far as you can see now, just as far as you can see in your own nervous system throughout the history of man. If change is going to take place on this part of life's body, it takes place through man. No other creature, no other inorganic form. It's through man. If a man attempts any sort of change, it comes about through what is apparently the only access to an apparently closed system, and that is always at its highest point. And the highest point in man is the yellow circuit. I did not feel much reaction when I gave you the end of the first paragraph or the first sentence. But people are not normally aware of the fact that all change is dependent upon it being able to be verbalized. Apparently. Because the yellow circuit is not the initial source. If you took it to what appeared to be a non-yellow circuit level, according to my kinds of mapping, if we took it down to what, according to my descriptions, what would be the red level in the human factory, that apparently someone decided, I have been drinking too much. It's gone from being a social occasion after work, I'm becoming an alcoholic, and it's hurting my health. All of that might appear to be a good red circuit based decision or motivation. I have got to cut down on drinking. I got to quit drinking. It is not possible for any change to be attempted unless it is put into words. Unless the yellow circuit can verbalize it, no one will change, apparently. Can any of you get any hint, any smell of how important the yellow circuit is to man, and parallelly, how important man is to life? No other creature that you can see, no other creature that you can be aware of shows any inclination to change. And I can say, not incorrectly, that they are not wired up to change, that the wiring is within itself a totally hardwired system in some creature other than man on this planet. I could say that not incorrectly, but I could also not incorrectly point out that the thing that keeps them from being able to change is a lack of a high enough circuit, that the points in their structure are not sufficiently raised to the point that they can operate sort of as a yellow circuit to life. That if you can't think change, you can't attempt change. If there was any desire in a creature that didn't have a yellow circuit, if this was possible to change, they could not change. If somewhere, this is not true, but if somewhere in a ferret there was a desire to try and get its hair to slick back instead of going over to the side, nothing could be done. Nothing. If it happened in 1 or 2 or 20,000 ferrets, if it could not be thought about in words, nothing would happen. All right, let's try and take it 2 or 3 different directions and talk about almost the same thing. Do you realize without a binary-based sense of consciousness, without the yellow circuit being based on this binary system, there would be no sensation of success or failure. There would be no sensation of things either progressing or regressing. There would be no sensation of movement. You would not know, are things moving or am I stagnant? Is life stagnant? Am I actually affecting any change? Never mind whether I'm actually doing it. I'm thinking about it a lot. I've been worrying about it for years. Am I doing it or have I forgotten about it? Have I become complacent? So anyone that believes that they have perceived some sort of attack not only on the yellow circuit but upon this great digital binary system that passes for human thought, the desire for change could not apparently offer any sort of reward, even if the reward, the payoff, seemed to be I failed again. There would be no comparable reaction to one's apparent attempt to change, the apparent desire to change, were it not for the binary system. There would be no way to say that you, any endeavor that humanity undertook, had ever succeeded or whether it failed. But now imagine in a trinary perceived universe or world, only a very few would survive. That if you were, let's just speak in what appears to be yellow circuit consciousness, if you were, as I keep hinting, able to cause such a shift in your own system that you were not only aware of the limitations, the ordinary arrangement of man being a binarily based conscious creature, but then simultaneously saw that everything, on yes, even this dear level, everything is trinarily based. That the third leg supporting everything is not seen, and that you were conscious of all of it. In other words, you were conscious that this is, in fact, a three-dimensional universe, even consciously, and that everybody else is living in 2, including your own line-level consciousness. Only a few people would survive that. If many people were thrown in that position, very few would survive. They would need a New Age Noah whose abilities and whose plans would be astounding. I don't even want to think about it. And an ark wouldn't do. He wouldn't have to float on water anymore. I wouldn't even begin to get it. Because if you were dealing yourself with a trinarily perceived world, how would you judge? What would be your immediate? What would be your automatic sensations? In what way would you judge, I have succeeded, I have failed? This apparently is asking too much of people, is it not? Based upon this overwhelming reaction. That's not an attack, because there's no way you can really answer, but normally I can drag a few people up to that dangerous edge of objective reality, wherein a few people want to trip. Where's the moon tonight? Don't you people hearing this on tape take that seriously? Is Jupiter in someone's Mars house? It's a joke, folks. It's a joke. Many of you have written me notes and poems and stories verging around the edges of your own system, having a kind of reaction to daydreaming, to trying to neuralize some of this, and wondering, as you present it to me, I'm not going to try and quote anybody over the last few years, but many of you have come upon a kind of intellectual wondering of sort of like this, that you want to say to yourself and to me, maybe, that the best I can put all this together at times, it sounds as though if all this came to pass, and that in some way I was conscious in my own personal nervous system, plugged into life, the way I am, and suddenly I was conscious in such a way, and my nervous system got activated 20, 50 years ahead of time. And I was in this state that everybody else always thinks is amazing in the past. And if I did see that things are not yes or no, right or wrong, up or down, that literally they are not, it's not possible. There can be no diametrically opposed situation. That would not be any conservation of energy. That within itself would spell catastrophe. But if that were true, back to me trying to quote some of you people, then some of your surmises skirt right along the edge of a kind of negative suspicion or fear that, hey, if I got like that, would I even do anything? Would I bother not only would I bother anymore to try and buy a new car, would I even bother to get up and go to work? Would I be so enlightened that I would quit worrying about saving money to get a nose job to be more attracted to women? Would I even take a shower on the offshoot that the world's prettiest woman's going to show up? Well, I got to admit, there's some validity to everything, including those things that are totally invalid, because they speak for themselves in that way. It's not as simple a problem as, would I give up trying to be rich and famous? Would I become even more disheveled than I am? I like the way I put it, to quote myself, that in a tri-nearly perceived world, only the few would survive. Because it would not be just a matter of still a binary basis, which is what you people are imagining that I was trying to put together in an archetypical example. Because your feeling, your suspicion now is, all right, if I was that way, wow, I'd quit doing anything, which is a binary concept. As opposed to, wow, if I was that way, I'd do everything. I'd do miracles, I'd do everything. As opposed to that, I might do nothing. That's not the problem. It's not the problem whether you'd still try to run the good rat race, whether you would still save up to get your hair transplanted. I keep hearing is that people transplanting their hair from one part of their head to another, or transplanting their hair like taking it here and transplanting it to somebody in Alabama. I guess it's none of my business. All right, let me take another right angle. Someone the other day brought up the subject of, I think they were called micro mini stereo systems, or micro or mini stereo systems. 3 or 4 years ago, they were advertised as being the hot new thing. And I assume all of you know enough about the breakthroughs and chip technology nowadays that the kinds of stereo equipment, the tuners, receivers, the amplifiers, stuff that did take this much room and weigh 50 pounds, they can do now on a chip and put it in a little plastic box and paint it up black and silver like high-tech. And they can get what used to be this big, as big as a suitcase, they can get them down to almost nothing. And I was aware that some of the larger companies were beginning their threatened advertising campaign of coming up next year, you're going to see little mini stereo systems small enough to fit on anybody's shelf in any apartment, that the tuner specs are as good as things that cost $1,000 and big as a suitcase 2 years ago. And they'll sound just as good. They'll put out 70 watts, and they're no bigger than this. And the person asked me, was I aware of the advertising? I said, yeah. And they said, what happened to it? And I suddenly realized none of us, including the person that asked me, had heard anything about it. But in those first several months, when several large companies had photographs of them, said they're going to be on the market any day now. Get your order in. All right, I just use that as a springboard. Let me point out to you that everything has a maximum and a minimum merchandisable size. And I guess you know I'm fixing to go real quick from stereo units somewhere else. But it is true in life. I could surely think up some more examples. Automobiles. For the last 30 years, I've been seeing little ads, which I guess you people, not ads, but little write-ups and Popular Mechanics and all those little magazines. People all over the world that's produced three-wheel cars, cars down the size of one person, get 4,000 miles a gallon. An idiot can repair it. It's got like a sewing machine motor. Well, all of you people, you've seen that kind of thing. That's been going on 30 years. People make prototypes. It can be done. It can be done now much easier than it could 30 years ago when people were fooling with it. But do you see any? There is a scale. We're back in the same kind of neighborhood as the tempo of life. We're back to the whole music of the harmony, the words, the tempo. But within that, there is also a scale. And I'm not going to dwell, it's not psychological, as ordinary people would call it. It is psychological in a sense, if any of you now have a full continual understanding that psychology, what they say they mean by psychological influences as opposed to physical influences, if any of you now have that continuing awareness that they just don't have the terminology down right. The psychological influences are physical influences. It's just life still behind itself at certain levels, talking about things in a kind of a gibberish way. It is not simply something psychologically based in the common use of that term. It is fully physical, that there is a scale, and it seems obvious, does it not? I'm not going to dwell on this part, we're going somewhere else. That people obviously did not react in the right way to these big electronics companies, that you mean I can buy something that big, and it's as good as that my brother has. He spent $1,000 for it 5 years ago, 70-watt system, that great tuner, and this thing will do it. And they say, yeah, and maybe even you go in, they got one, you try it. Obviously, nobody wanted it. As far as I know, they never went into, if they went into production, they did not go into wide distribution. They just disappeared. They can make an automobile without any doubt that's not much bigger than you, not much bigger than just a wheel in front and a wheel in back and somewhere to sit, and talk about saving money. Who wants it? There is a scale, there is a maximum and a minimal size that on the human level, life finds to be merchandisable. Life can dream. Life will try almost anything once, remember. That probably had some of these companies even tool up and probably made some amount of those mini stereo systems. I don't know anybody's got one. I hadn't thought of one in all these years. Nobody's asked me. This is the first time anybody's even brought it up. They're sitting somewhere, or if you find them, I assume that they're just giveaway prices. Now let me point out, if you get away from what appears to be hard merchandise of stereos and automobiles, what seems to be human problems must meet the same standards. There is a maximum and a minimum scale that are merchandisable to humans. All right? How about, this would appear to be too large. Think about a stereo system. Instead of them putting it down in this much, what if they went in the other direction? And all they're going to spend, the guts of it, were still no bigger than this. And plastic, now that oil prices are down, would be fairly cheap, that they can build this huge box that makes your brother's 2 or 3 year old $1,000 set look like nothing. They can put a few bricks in it or some sand, and the sucker is gigantic. And all kinds of flashing lights, which cost almost nothing, and inside the guts are only like this. Well, you do know, and it's not just that people say, I don't have room for it. People might say that, it might be true. But there is a maximum scale. Not psychologically, it is as molecular as anything else, that people in general, if they went in, let's go back to stereos right quick, there's a size past which hardly anyone, it would not be merchandisable to life, it would not be profitable. There's going to be a size that no one in general, not profitably, not enough people, would ever buy this. You could keep cutting the price. You could throw in 2 weeks in Daytona Beach. But there's a size, just think about it, that's why you people, some of you are laughing, there's a size that if you went in, there's a size past which you would not buy a stereo, a refrigerator, a washing machine. No matter what they said, no matter how cheap it was, if the washing machine was 3 times as big as a deep freeze and did the same, well, you're hearing some of what I'm saying. All right. So apparently there's sizes past which, in scale, that humans cannot, in a sense, molecularly relate to it. It's not going to work. Life cannot sell it. It will not serve the purpose. Now back to problems that would appear to be non-physical. Between a maximum and a minimum lies where each person feels as though I am put upon. There are things I must be concerned with. There are things that I should change in me. There are things I should be concerned in the world. But look how tricky. Maybe I shouldn't get tricky. Some of you are just beginning to hear something. All right, non-tricky first. Problems too large. Now, as always, there are exceptions for you newer people. Just getting this. You could have a stereo the size of a Buick, and somebody would buy it. Don't write me letters and say that you'd buy one or your crazy Uncle Fred would buy one. I know that. And so, what I'm about to say, the example, there are people that swear that this is their concern, and we cannot go out and put them on the rack or in the Iron Maiden and hold matches to their feet and make them go, no, I didn't mean it. But problems too large. How about world hunger? How about world wars, the continuing hostility? The problem is too large. Now, life talks about it through people. Concerts are played, charities go on day and night, charities advertised. There are people who make a living working for these charities. There are people ostensibly out helping distribute the funds that the charities raise to help feed the poor. But an individual, you can read a big article, see a movie or a television show, and they start bombarding you with pictures of people dying all over the world. They start giving you figures of how many people are dying every minute. Now it's getting worse. And now you sit watching the TV show, stuffing your face, and they show it more and more, and let's assume that you are wired up to be an average, middle-class, decent American, decent human, and you look at it and you think that's terrible. This popcorn and stuff I'm eating right now, if they were here, I'd stop right now. Everybody could get in the room, I'd give it to them. They'd clean out my icebox. But you cannot accept, don't throw out exceptions. I'm just pointing out that how life finds it in general. The problem is too large for it to be individually merchandisable. Apparently. If it was, you got to see how things would change. If it was merchandisable, that is, that everybody could take it as being a personal problem and they were wired up to do something about it, then something would get done. The hungry people of the world would be fed very shortly, or else we just have to bring it down to some common denominator. We'd be eating less. We'd all get up to some level. And it's got nothing to do with psychological causes. It's got nothing to do with human greed, as it's called. It is that the problem is too large. I said I wasn't going to be tricky, but I could also point out to you, since things are not two-dimensional, that can also be seen as the problem is too small, but I won't go into that. Forget I said that. Now I'll go into really, problem's too small. Everybody's got those. That's primarily what constitutes so-called self-criticism. That's the kind of things that you'll readily admit. Sure, I got a bad temper. Or you break something that you borrowed from somebody, and somebody says, have you ever noticed that you're real clumsy with stuff? You go, yeah, I know what it is. I do break a lot of stuff. I know it. Some of you are hearing me already. It's the feel that you can get in yourself. You can hear it in other people. This is a common occurrence in all of humanity. Part of being a piece of unfinished business. But your ready admission in the marketplace to your problems, your shortcomings, without it being analyzed in this way, ordinary people ordinarily take the problems as being so small, it's not even worth fooling with. Sure, I got a bad temper, so what? Everybody does. What's on TV? I guess I am clumsy, but, damn, you can't watch yourself all the time. You get the thing about stuff, I guess I break stuff, but, what the hell? You got anything to drink? That's it. The problem is so small. And it's not some error on the individual's part, but that which people readily admit as being my shortcomings, my limitations, the things in me that are, if not broken, at least they're loose. They should be attended to, but Jesus Christ, I'm nearly 50 years old, and everybody's got a temper. Everybody breaks stuff. I don't know what it is. I've had 5 wives, but I know people's had more wives than that. It's the kind of self-admission, the kind of self-attack, the kind of readily admissible problem. And what is being enunciated, not just through the yellow circuit, but down into the blue circuit and lower, is the problem is so small, to hell with it. I told you I would not be tricky. Told you that twice, so I'll tell you again, I'm not going to be tricky. But let me point out, I could also point out to you, from another viewpoint, those problems are so large that nobody can deal with them. Because ordinary people's got a bad temper, there's not a damn thing they can do about their bad temper. They don't even have a bad temper. They are what they are. They call it, I got a bad temper, and I should change it. That's being human. But they can't change it. The problem is too large. It makes world hunger, the cure for world hunger. It makes that look like a picnic. But that is so dirty, I'm not going to mention that, so just forget that. Now these 3 areas. Somebody pointed out to me that at times it looks like I'm looking down, somebody here on the tape recently, and maybe kicking. I don't know if everybody sees it, you people on tape. I got a microphone, and it's down through my pants in my pocket, and it's on the floor. Somebody here during the taping recently just wanted to know if I was aware of it, and I am. So I don't know what you people think, whether I'm shy and have to keep looking at my feet, whether I have notes written on the floor, whether I have the DTs and I'm kicking at imaginary rats or something. Why don't you show it to them so they can see it one time? as I'm moving about at times, I have to keep this out of my way. And that's when I look down and I'll be kicking. I guess it's possible somebody see it and think that in some way I got rattled in college and I still think I'm playing football or... All right, how about? Let's see if I can pull three things together since I've talked about three general things up until now, for those keeping score. If you could raise or lower the threshold of what seems to be your personal problems, I suggest to you very strongly they would disappear from the marketplace faster than many stereos, than one-person 50-pound cars that'll do 10 miles an hour. And all you've got to do, and it makes no difference, well, I try not to be that tricky. You can either raise or lower the threshold to you. It seems to be that, all right, some of the problems I got, I can think of a few of them, they're so large. I don't know where I got the idea, but I worry about them. I worry about me. I worry about my relationships with others. But they're so large, I don't know where to start. All right. If you call them large, that's fine. Then perhaps, based upon my other descriptions tonight, you may say, all right, I believe what you said about being too small. And there are some of them that are so small, I just pass them off and I think, well, it's not even worth fooling with. I'll accept that. Remember, if I was being tricky, which I'm not, I could point out that you could have it backwards, or it could be irrelevant. But since we can't speak in the irrelevant, we got to speak in the relevant. That's why I got to say that there is a scale, and they got to fit in with either being beyond too small and just this side of being too large. And so whichever category you think any of your problems fit into, it doesn't matter. Well, of course it matters, but it doesn't matter. If you can raise the threshold, let's take it that you think that there's something that bothers you that's a kind of problem, something that you're concerned with about you or your way in which you're plugged into life. All right, if you can raise the threshold, that is, it seems to be too large, and you can raise the threshold to where you can almost grasp it, or vice versa. I got things that are so small, but if I could lower the threshold down more, then they would fall into the general range of what is merchandisable, what is useful, what is meaningful to me. You understand? If you can expand to where that which seemed to be too large and or that which seemed to be too small now fall within the perimeters of what is merchandisable for you, is what I am strongly suggesting to you. In either case, do it that way, or those of you who can listen in another dimension, you can push them out further. Instead of lowering the bridge, you raise the water. Instead of trying to lower toward the small ones, you can raise it and just cut them out. And you can lower that which seemed to be too big. Did I get too tricky again? All right, if you took what seemed to be a worldwide problem, and it seemed to be that I am, just all my life I've worried about humanity fighting with one another, or world hunger, something tremendous. I'm worried about religions can't seem to get along. If you can raise the threshold to where this problem to you is no more than, let's say, a problem that you can deal with in your life. You're wired up, just an ordinary person, to deal with it. Like the problem of how to make car payments. Let's say that due to your brilliance and the way in which you've learned from experience, at an early age you learned when you get a loan on your car, you make the payments or they take it away from you. And so real quick you learn, and no matter what happens, assuming you need a car or your rent, it's your house or apartment, is no matter what happens, you make these payments. It seems to be a problem, everybody bitches about it, but it's one problem that's within your parameters. It's small enough, it's big enough that gets your notice, but it's also small enough that you may have to go without cigarettes or beer 1 week out of the month, but you make the payment, all right? You can say, yeah, it's a problem. It's a pain in the ass, always having to pay rent, always a car note. By the time you get paid off, you got to buy another car and more car note. But it's a problem, apparently, you can deal with, right? Then back to the problems that seem to be too large. If you could up your threshold, then you could take world hunger, continuing hostilities among peoples and religions, and if you upped your threshold where it was not right there at the limit, beyond the limit. It's so large it's not merchandisable to you. You can't use it. You could up your limit. What if it fell somewhere closer to the range of a car payment? And when I said I wouldn't get dirty when I went off on this sidetrack, what if you could lower it up the upper end? Your threshold now is high enough that you hear about world hunger, hostilities, and it seems to be a problem. You don't think about it all the time, but you think about it some of the times. If you don't think about it a lot of the times, every time you hear about it, you get concerned. What if you could lower the threshold so when you heard about it, it was like a foreign language? That just didn't compute. It was like your receiver that they were sending in on the television channels in the spectrum of the sound spectrum, and your receiver only went up to AM. You heard it noise, something going on, but you just didn't hear it. The thing is, if you can change the limits in either ways I've described, that is, either of the four ways, that you could expand or condense from either end the threshold of what are your automatic, your wired up limits of a merchandisable size of problems, you got no problems. Now let's have somebody see just this one tape and write me and say, well, wait a minute. What would happen to charities? What would happen with the milk of human kindness? Good question. Based upon the time of year and the temperature, and the kind of interplay between Mars and Jupiter, I seem to be attempting to plow into asphalt. Were it not for a binary sense of consciousness, a binary-based sense of consciousness, you could not talk about, you could not perceive maximum, minimal limits. You could not conceive of an idea that for a problem to exist, it must fall within the framework of being a size that is not too large nor too minute. There would be no perception of anything verbally. It is not some fallacy on life's part that things are arranged in what I laughingly refer to as a binary-based consciousness. We're back to the good old initial, if you want to start on a real crude level. So-called Newton's laws, they're all binary-based. The ability to hear, the ability for me to say something is based upon action and apparently equal and opposite reaction, or I couldn't make sound. You couldn't hear the sound over the tape here in person were it not for what amounts to a binary condition. If thrown into the laws of physics as they're perceived now, and the production of sound, the hearing of sound, if there was thrown in a third equal third partner into the law of opposite and equal reaction to every action, you would be in a hell of a mess. That is, if things indeed were binary, if that was the extent of it, and you suddenly threw in a third and equal partner to all of this, nobody could make any sounds, nobody could hear anything. Or as I pointed out, in a trinarily perceived world, only a few would survive, if that was possible. I should have found a simpler, more basic book in our Vede Mecum, if we had a Bible. Because the real Bible is to have simple chapters and then more complex chapters. Or does it just have simple readers and then more complex readers, those who talk louder? All right, let's try something less exotic. How about our truism for the night to go on the head of the church bulletin for next week is you can't go to heaven if you whine. Now, I presented variations of this throughout the years, but by now most of you have had some occasion to realize how common is. Almost everybody can hear themselves whine. I would suggest to you, I hate to do it, but I would suggest to you that if you'd been around when any of your heroes, and say, who are they? I keep forgetting. Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad. Doesn't that cover it? Confucius, maybe. I got to tell you, if you'd been around long enough, you'd have heard them whine. And it's sad to say, because all of you, you don't have to feel guilty, but all of you should have sufficient experience now to hear yourself whine. It's almost as though humanity, that everybody, left to their own devices, they make noises like cars that were left idling. And as long as you're out of bed and your eyes are open and your throat muscles are making sounds, it's like you constantly walk away from this thing and you go in to go shopping, you have to pop in and get a quart of milk, or you just jump around the corner to use the restroom there at the service station. And this thing is left idling 18 hours a day, and if you don't watch it, listen to cars idling. I suggest to you, they sound like they're whining. They're not going anywhere, there they sit. They can't do anything till you get back, you got them in neutral. They may heat up if you stay gone too long. You stay gone too long, they run out of fuel. And they sit there and it's as though they're whining. If there's anything, which there's not, but if there's anything that was a good basis for real guilt for the few, it would be the fact that if you don't sit there with that car just about all day and all night, or find out how to take the car and put your feet through the floorboard and carry it in everywhere you go, you walk away from that bastard just for a couple of seconds. You can be thinking great important thoughts, on the verge of joining the Buddha, and suddenly you listen and you're whining. Now, it doesn't matter necessarily what apparently is the context, the content. You just listen to the sound. But I can assure you that you can't go to heaven if you whine. Now, see, wasn't that simpler than all this multidimensional, and me being the only person conjuring up a world of, I'm talking about a real world of 4D physics, not these imagined mathematical worlds of 11 dimensions. I'm talking about worlds right here. How about something else more mundane? Do you realize that from one, of course I'm going to come up with two since we're in the binary mode here, but from one viewpoint, this is like a blasphemous satire of religion. But from another viewpoint, equally as valid, religion is like a grotesque pastiche of this. Literally. Now, given people's initial exposure to this, and some people could brush along, such as these tapes, they might show up in some other city at some other time every few weeks and see some of this, and they could continue for a long period of time with a distinct, as far as they're concerned, a distinct and quite real and valid feeling that this is a perversion of religion of some kind, based upon their own hardwired background, what they believe they've read, understood, experienced, heard about, But you can also see from another equally valid viewpoint, just in the binary world, that religion, everything you've ever heard and read about, once you begin to get some personal taste of what this is and experience, you realize is not as strongly as I start out putting it, that it's not any kind of blasphemous satire, but it is almost, I guess in the first definition, pastiche, an imitation from the original, and not necessarily with any negative connotation. It doesn't have to be satirical, but it's like a bad copy. So as far removed as religion always is from this, for the few, you can look at it another way. This would never exist at any time in any place had it not been for the religions already wired up in the horizontal past. And so for periods of times, thousands of years in some cases, people are still wired up to be responding molecularly to some religion that had its foundation in this thousands of years ago. And then when they hear a new version of it, and they're still studying books, they still believe that they're reacting to the present truth of something that was dead thousands of years ago, then this sounds as though the sensation is that this is a kind of perverted blasphemy. But, I didn't point an example, people who believe that they're Christians, that right now just firmly believe they are, and they could hear much of what I say in a certain way. And say, well, wait, you are in some way taking the heart of Christianity and you're perverting it. The same people. There's no attack because this is the way, and they're not supposed to, but you people should be able to hear it. They claim that somebody named Jesus was the source of Christianity. But nobody remembers. It's right there in words. That they not only accused him of the same thing at the time, according to some reports, they did more than tell him, no, no, no. They did more than say, bad boy. At every given time, from one quite valid viewpoint, from one quite valid horizontal viewpoint at the time, wherever this appears, whenever it appears, it can be seen as being a kind of grotesque pastiche of the religion of that day, and it could have been several thousand years old. But what I'm saying is the religion of that day. But you cannot have one without the other. And from one equally valid viewpoint, it's of no great importance. And this is even of less importance because only a few people see it, and when they see it, it's over in just a split second. But you could start out with a sensation once you begin to think that you are feeling something from all of this strange mapping and trinary conversation. Well, it's this half-gallon conversation put into a quart bag every night, brought down to a binary level, that for a split second, somewhere along the way, it'll strike you from whatever religion you grew up in, it'll suddenly strike you, hey, in a sense, my whole religion, my cultural religion, my forefathers' religion, the religion of my whole race and my people, it'll strike you a split second. It's a real crude, not even satire, because that denotes some kind of understanding. This is just a sad copy of what this is. Of course, a few people that get that glimpse, as I said, it's over about that fast, that you then see, well, that's the way things have to be. This is another example, I suggest to you, apparently, it would seem, perhaps. Another great example of how everything has to be on a binary basis here to ordinary sight, to ordinary perception. Everything, if it's going to exist, it has got to be readily split into two. This is not, as many of you get glimpses of, this is not the true state of things. That's why I keep saying apparently. and some of you are beginning to have your own notions along the way, correctly so, that things are not absolutely cut into diametrically opposed forces of some kind, that things are not black versus white, up versus down, that couldn't be. It just couldn't. You can try and quote me theories from particle physics, but what it is, in the cases of some of you who have really sent me a message, it's not based upon anything external. It's based upon you understand that that's not the way things are. And you're right. But we have to start somewhere. I wouldn't have gotten you this far if I hadn't started off demanding that you see that human consciousness, everything that the human element on this planet evidently can come up with, immediately presents itself divided in two. Immediately. If it doesn't, it'll be forgotten in almost the bat of an eye. In some cases, the eye of a bat. But I don't care to go into that. Not just before we eat. If I had not gotten you to begin to see that that is a fact, it's everywhere. If anything exists, it just immediately, in a way that I had never noticed, it just immediately, agreeably, in a manner gushing, may I say, presents itself cut in two. If that does not come to pass almost immediately, it's forgotten. It is gone. It is packed away somewhere with the micro stereo units. How would you survive based upon what you understand now? How would you survive in a world that was suddenly trinarily based? I suggest that you would be, how can I be decent about this? Those of you that think perhaps that you're ugly now, that your nose is too big, your ears are too big, you're too short, anything that you may feel that sort of makes you stand out in a less than agreeable manner, if you were suddenly thrown into a trinarily perceived, that is, everybody else saw in a trinary basis, and suddenly, without your own cooperation necessarily, you suddenly saw that everything is triaxial. The word mutant, does that ring any bells? I suggest to you that the word mutant would be the kind of thing you'd immediately dream that, boy, I wish I could just get down to the level of just being a mutant. I've got one I want to read. Somebody sent me tonight. It's a case of apparently taking on some life. This is just observations a person here sent me tonight. I went to a secluded woodsy area recently and was surprised to find that, quote, getting away may be just that. Being in that kind of environment, you're cut off from what seems to be the energy of life's more intense moments. It's almost like going back in time where people in life's top-of-the-line growth are restricted. It would seem that people who become reclusive, to become more in tune with life's growth, such as trying to become more enlightened. But you could also see that they're actually separating themselves from what's taking place in life's current enlightenment. What's left are one's voices and energies which are always present in an environment. It may be useful to get away to see one's own voices more clearly, or to see how they're no different than anyone else's. But life is at its peak, it would seem to me now, in the cities. Take that in the widest sense of the word. There's more energy there to feed off of, more gibberish to eat. So it would seem that hermits or monks would be supporting and living in the past rather than working towards future growth. Full speed ahead is where the speed is. That's beyond me talking around areas like this and even talking point blank. See, that's the difference in somebody getting out and they actually have their own experience, not just the movement of their entire organism out here to the woods, but then they're able to take a piece of something that I cut off that was alive, and they get their own view of it. Not theoretical, but they feel the reality that to do this, at least in the way in which I am directing it, You'd have to go somewhere else to escape it. Cutting oneself off from the more intense parts is less than optimally profitable. Again, there is a matter of scale. I don't have us all living in Manhattan or the South Bronx. I'm in favor of backyards and swimming pools, acres. But insofar as shutting oneself off, you're in the wrong place. You do not have to live in West LA or Manhattan or Midtown Atlanta. But if you are going to grow, if you're going to have the possibility of growing at the fastest possible speed, you need to be, I assure you, in close proximity to where life is growing the fastest. You were born there. The United States, this part of the world, you were born there. But that would be the unrecognized folly of someone now packing up and moving over to a place that is operating on a lesser scale. Or the ones I keep using, Tibet and India, that was the last 4 or 5 decades were historically the places that Americans ran off to. Or when they were better versed in English, that's the kind of places to which Americans ran off. to. I know some of you people just hearing these tapes the first few times feel as though you missed some background, some of the things I keep referring to. And I am a little past the point of going verbally on any kind of crusade telling you that you're wasting your time to go to India or Tibet or to China or to Burma. But literally, you would be stepping into the past. It is not to say that a person in that part of the world could not make their own progress, but for somebody born here, born in a place that was operating at a certain tempo, where the rhythm was operating at a certain tempo, where the lyrics of the music are more complex or more sophisticated, where the harmonies are past the point of the basic, even pleasant harmonies. They're into more dissonant sounds, not only of the Schoenbergs musically, but the dissonant sounds of factories, airplanes going overhead, rockets taking off. You don't have to live in the midst of a rolling mill or at Cape Canaveral, but someone who was born here, that their genes popped up here to go to another part of the world, to say the very least, to go to a place where the scale is different, where the tempo is different, where the harmonies are different. You're going backwards. You would not be finding anything, and there would be simply a variation of this as this person was observing and suspecting, even more so, that if you tried it here, to absolutely abandon what seems to be all of the pitfalls of cosmopolitan existence and to become a hermit, you'd be cutting yourself off at the ankles. You'd be making it harder to do anything. You would be moving your own genetic consciousness, which you cannot change the basis of it. You've got to be able to do something after you fully recognize the basis of it, but you would never recognize the hardwired basis of it if you removed yourself from the very place that is operating in tempo and harmony and in rhyme with the music of your own genetic code. That you would be doing yourself no service at all to remove yourself from the general environs of where you were born, where you grew up, where your genes popped up in this life. Well, I wonder if Billy Graham and the Pope have nights like this. Well, they do, but see, they got a way out. In their more humbler moments, they'd think, well, I wasn't up to it, which I don't have such moments, folks. I said that, I had to put in binary words, but that's neither here nor there. That's as close to an objective statement as you can hear. I do not have such moments, so that takes away that excuse. But then their other excuse is, well, wait a minute, evil spirits are at work clouding the eyes, putting little evil spirits are putting their fingers in these fine folks' ears. They're clouding their minds so that they cannot hear your great message. Of course, that is a childish explanation, but given the choice of the two, we might as well reach a mutual understanding. It ain't ever my fault. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm saying. So we're left with either evil spirits or Jupiter getting too close to Mars again. And I know I'm just sick of it. Well, be that as it may, we can leave on this high note.